Xia Ling had always hated the sound of her own voice when she spoke to customers. It was like she was trying too hard to sound pleasant, which made everything sound fake. The way she asked, "What can I get for you today?" had the same energy as a cardboard cutout waving at a parade float. And yet, here she was, standing behind the counter of Funky Brew's cafe, trying to mask the growing anxiety that only the small hours of the afternoon could provide. The cafe was one of those places with a soundtrack that was half indie rock and half the hum of an overworked espresso machine. Every other customer was a hipster with a beard so carefully cultivated it could have been a national park. Xia Ling, a simple barista with a penchant for getting things wrong, always felt a bit out of place. She slid her fingers across the polished wood of the counter, smoothing out an imaginary crease. The cafe was nearly empty. A couple of regulars were scattered around in their usual corner, their laptops open, probably writing the next great American novel. Or whatever it was people did at these places, pretending they were too busy to talk. Xia Ling stared at the clock on the wall. It was ticking closer to the time when she'd be off shift, but her impatience only made the hours drag, and then it happened. One of the regulars, a young man with messy hair and a permanent scowl that screamed, "I read Kafka for fun," approached the counter. Xia Ling glanced at him, trying to remember his usual order. He was always the same, ordering some complicated espresso concoction with a long string of pretentious adjectives. But today, he didn't even look at the menu. "I'll have, the usual, I guess. The one with the dark roast and a shot of vanilla." Xia Ling blinked, momentarily stunned. We don't have anything like that on the menu." She could feel her cheeks flushing as she awkwardly pulled the espresso machine's lever to start a fresh shot. "Are you sure you?" But before she could finish, the man nodded absently. Yeah. That one. Thanks." And without another word, he moved to the back of the room to settle into his usual spot. Xia Ling turned to the espresso machine, her mind whirling. What was I even talking about? We don't have anything like that. She glanced at the menu, just to be sure. Nope. There was no dark roast with vanilla shot listed anywhere. She shook her head, chalking it up to stress. Maybe she was losing her mind. The moment the drink was ready, she placed it on the counter and watched as the man took it, almost instinctively, without so much as a second glance. "Thanks, I guess," she muttered under her breath, unsure whether she was even supposed to be handing him the drink. Then something strange happened. As the man took a sip, he froze. His eyes widened. And he smiled. It was like the sun had just broken through the clouds in the middle of a downpour. A slow, incredulous smile that stretched across his face as if he'd just discovered the secret of the universe. Xia Ling's heart skipped a beat. She blinked, confused, but the man wasn't done. He turned to her with a look of pure wonder. "This is it," he said, his voice low and awe-stricken. "This is the one." What do you mean?" she stammered, still not entirely sure what was going on. "This," he repeated, gesturing to the coffee cup in his hand, "this is the best thing I've ever tasted in my life." "What did you put in this?" His eyes sparkled like a child who had just discovered the magic of sugar. She furrowed her brow. "I just made you a regular espresso. No vanilla. It's just coffee, that's it." "No," he insisted, "no, it's more than that. I can't explain it, but this is perfect." "How did you do it?" Xia Ling's mouth went dry. There was no way. She hadn't done anything special. Just made the coffee. Her hands were starting to shake. Before she could protest, the man left a bill on the counter and quickly exited the cafe, still holding the cup like it was the Holy Grail. The door jingled as he vanished, leaving Xia Ling to stand there, utterly perplexed. A few minutes passed. The cafe felt unusually quiet now. She stared at the espresso machine, wondering if it was possible she'd made a mistake, or if something about the coffee had gotten jumbled in her head. But when she checked the rest of the day's orders, there wasn't anything out of the ordinary. Then came the sudden, gut-wrenching realization. she had no idea what had just happened. Back at her apartment, things didn't get any clearer. Xia Ling had an old wooden clock on her desk, a relic passed down from her grandmother, who'd always told her strange stories about how time wasn't what people thought it was. She'd laugh it off then, but now, looking at the clock, its brass hands frozen at 5 minutes past 12, she felt an odd pull. She hadn't touched it in ages, but today, something was different. The idea struck her with the clarity of a lightning bolt. She reached for the clock, feeling a strange buzzing sensation through her fingertips, and then, the impossible happened, time rewound. 5 minutes, exactly. The moment was so surreal she could hardly believe it. The room felt lighter, as though the weight of the minutes themselves had been stripped away. She glanced at the clock again, now ticking normally, and looked at her phone. She had just relived the past few moments. No way, she thought, pressing her hand against her chest. I can't be losing it this bad. Then she realized, the coffee. She'd made the coffee, and it had somehow been different. Perfect, even. She had just seen a customer react in a way that defied all logic, and now, she had bent time itself. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the clock again, staring at the little brass hands. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't some kind of joke. She wasn't just having a breakdown. She had done something impossible. Xia Ling swallowed. She was suddenly aware of how quiet the room had gotten. The clock ticked. The room felt too still. As she stared at the clock in her hand, she remembered something her grandmother had said, her words echoing back with unexpected clarity. The last time shaper is always found when time is at its breaking point. And at that exact moment, Xia Ling felt something shift, an awareness deep within her, a pull towards something ancient and unknowable. She wasn't sure why, but she felt as though her grandmother's words weren't just a metaphor, they were a warning. Xia Ling sat motionless, her fingers still wrapped around the clock. Her mind raced. The words, last time shaper, clung to her thoughts like a haunting melody, their meaning beginning to settle over her with a weight she hadn't fully grasped until now. She could feel the pulse of time itself beneath her skin, as though the world was vibrating in tune with some ancient, forgotten rhythm. It was exhilarating, terrifying, and completely out of her control. Her grandmother had always been a strange woman. The kind who would hum little songs under her breath while dusting off old trinkets and telling Xia Ling stories about the secrets of the world, none of which had ever made sense to the young girl. Now, in the solitude of her small apartment, those strange tales came rushing back with a newfound clarity. The stories she used to dismiss as bedtime nonsense suddenly seemed prophetic. Time wasn't linear, her grandmother had said. It could be bent, woven, and even shaped. But Xia Ling had always assumed it was just the rambling of a woman too deep into her own imagination, until now, she looked around her apartment, the room feeling heavier somehow. She needed answers. And she needed them fast. The air in the room felt charged with potential. She stood up, pacing restlessly, trying to make sense of everything. There was a quiet, almost imperceptible hum coming from the clock, like it was trying to tell her something, but the message was lost in the static of her confusion. Instinctively, she reached for her phone and dialed a number she hadn't thought of in years. Xia Ling? It's been a while, came the voice on the other end, rough and gruff, but oddly familiar. Wei Chen. An old friend. He was the kind of person who could walk into a room and make it feel like an electrical storm had just struck, his energy infectious and chaotic. It had been years since they'd spoken, but there was no mistaking that voice. Wei Chen, she said, almost breathless, I need your help. It's about my grandmother. And time. And, she broke off, the words tangled in her throat. She had no idea how to explain what had just happened. How could she? It sounded insane. It was insane. I know this sounds crazy, she continued, forcing herself to focus, but I think I've inherited something. Something to do with time. And I need to understand it. Fast. There was a long pause on the other end, so long that Xia Ling started to wonder if maybe the connection had dropped. But then, Wei Chen spoke, his tone a mix of curiosity and wariness. "Okay, I'm listening. You've always been a bit offbeat, but this sounds like something straight out of one of those weird legends your grandmother used to tell." Xia Ling felt her heart sink. He remembers those stories too. "Wei Chen, I'm serious," she said, her voice more insistent now. "You've got to come over. I think I've got the power to change time. And I don't know what to do with it. I think my grandmother knew about it. But I'm not sure how to control it. Or," her voice faltered, "or if I'm even supposed to have it." There was a moment of silence, and then Wei Chen's voice came through again, this time softer, more deliberate. "All right. I'll be there soon. Hold on." The night was dark when Wei Chen arrived at her apartment. He knocked twice, slow and deliberate, as though he were testing her resolve. Xia Ling opened the door to find him standing there, his usual disheveled look in full force, a leather jacket thrown over an old band tee, his hair still in that "I just woke up and don't care" state. But there was something different in his eyes now, something like recognition, like he knew something she hadn't yet figured out. "So," he said, stepping inside and looking around. "You say you've got time-bending powers? Should I be worried?" "I'm not kidding, Wei Chen," Xia Ling replied, closing the door behind him. "This is real." She led him to the small living room, where the clock sat on the table like a relic of some forgotten time. Wei Chen's eyes immediately went to it, his expression flickering with something she couldn't quite place. He had always been the more pragmatic one, grounded even when they were both lost in their reckless adventures. But this was different. This was beyond recklessness. This was dangerous. Xia Ling placed the clock in his hands. "I don't know what's happening. I just touched it," and then, Wei Chen nodded slowly, turning the clock over, examining it as if it held all the answers. The silence between them stretched. It felt heavy, like a taut string waiting to snap. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up at her. "This is it, isn't it? You've really got it." She nodded, but she could feel the weight of the words before she even said them. "I think I'm the last of the time shapers." Wei Chen blinked, his brow furrowing. "The time shapers? That's not real. That's a myth." "That's what I thought," Xia Ling said quietly. "But my grandmother, she was one. And she passed it on to me. She told me about the time shapers. How we're supposed to pass on the ability to the next person, to keep time balanced." Wei Chen's gaze softened, but there was a strange urgency in his eyes. "And you think the time's come for you to pass it on?" Xia Ling felt her pulse quicken. "I don't know. But something's happening. I'm seeing things, disturbances. Moments where time feels wrong. I think I'm supposed to find someone. Someone who can carry the legacy forward." "And you don't know who that is?" Wei Chen asked. She shook her head. "I don't even know how to start looking." Wei Chen set the clock back down on the table, his fingers brushing the edge of it. For a moment, he was quiet, lost in thought. Then, he gave her a sidelong glance. "Well, that's not exactly true, is it?" Xia Ling's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" He looked at her, eyes sharp. "You've already met them." The realization hit Xia Ling with a force that nearly knocked the breath out of her. Lu Tao. And Qi. Wei Chen himself. The candidates had been in front of her all along. She just hadn't seen it. But now, the pieces were falling into place, and everything about her grandmother's cryptic warnings started to make sense. "I don't," she began, but Wei Chen cut her off. "You've got to find them. Whoever it is, you'll know. But you don't have long, Xia Ling. The timeline's destabilizing. The time shapers, they aren't the only ones looking for control over time. If you don't pass it on, everything could unravel." Xia Ling felt a chill run down her spine. The Time Breaker. The name her grandmother had whispered in those same old stories. The one who sought to break time, to control it. Whoever this force was, they were drawing closer. And if she didn't act soon, she could be the one who set everything on a path toward destruction. Okay, Xia Ling said, her voice firmer now, the weight of the responsibility sinking in. Let's find them. And make sure we don't lose time again. But as they both turned toward the door, ready to seek out the next piece of this broken puzzle, Xia Ling couldn't shake the feeling that someone was already watching them. Someone who knew exactly what they were trying to do. Xia Ling couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. As she and Wei Chen made their way out of the apartment and into the chilled night air, the weight of the moment pressed down on her. It wasn't just the responsibility of passing on the power of time that gnawed at her, but something else, an eerie sensation that hung in the air like static electricity. Every footstep on the sidewalk felt like an echo, every street lamp flickering as though it, too, was waiting for something to happen. Wei Chen walked beside her, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his leather jacket, his mind working. He wasn't the kind of person to show fear, but the tension between them was palpable. He understood what was at stake, even if he was still wrapping his head around the strange reality they'd found themselves in. Lu Tao's clothes, Wei Chen said, breaking the silence. He hangs around the university, doesn't he? Xia Ling nodded. Yeah, he teaches philosophy. I've seen him around the campus, but I haven't talked to him in a while. Not since he started making those predictions. Predictions? Wei Chen's brow furrowed, she glanced at him, meeting his gaze. Lu Tao can predict things. Small things. A few seconds into the future, maybe a minute, but enough to make you wonder. People always chalk it up to coincidence, but he's always been different. Weird. Wei Chen chuckled under his breath, though there was no humor in it. So, you think he could be the one? I don't know, Xia Ling replied. But I've got a gut feeling. When I touched that clock, it felt like time was trying to tell me something. And he's the first person I thought of. They fell into another silence as they walked, the streets around them growing quieter as they neared the university campus. The night had settled into an almost eerie stillness, the usual hum of city life muted by the urgency hanging between them. Xia Ling's mind raced, thoughts tangled and messy. There was so much she still didn't understand, and the deeper she got into this strange legacy, the more terrifying it became. Time itself wasn't a simple gift, it was a force, something to be wielded with precision, but also something that could slip out of control in an instant. When they reached the university, the campus was nearly empty, save for a few students lingering in the corners, their faces buried in books or glowing screens. Lu Tao's office was a small, unassuming room on the second floor of the philosophy department. The door was slightly ajar, and as Xia Ling and Wei Chen approached, she could hear muffled voices inside, low, rhythmic, like a chant. She glanced at Wei Chen, a question in her eyes. He raised an eyebrow but said nothing. They both stepped forward, the creak of the door louder than they intended. Inside, Lu Tao was sitting at his desk, his back to them, muttering to himself in a language Xia Ling couldn't place. His office was filled with books, papers scattered everywhere, and an old clock on the wall, its hands spinning at an impossible speed. Lu Tao? Xia Ling called softly, not wanting to startle him. He froze, his head jerking up in a way that made her feel like he had been expecting them. Slowly, he turned in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he took them both in. Lu Tao was younger than she remembered, but his eyes were as sharp as ever, piercing through her like he could see everything she was hiding. He didn't speak right away, just watched her with a curious intensity. You found it, he said finally, his voice calm, almost resigned. The clock. The power. I knew you would. Xia Ling's heart skipped. How did you? I've been waiting for you, Xia Ling. I've been waiting for the moment when the last time Shaper would come to me. You're not the only one who's felt the pull, you know. I've known about this ability for a long time. He motioned to the clock on the wall, its hands spinning faster now, creating a blur of motion. Wei Chen stepped forward, his expression skeptical. You think you can control it too? Time? Lu Tao's lips curled into a small, almost sad smile. Control? No. But I can feel it. I can see glimpses of what's coming. I've learned to bend it. But it's not about control, it's about understanding. The balance of time is delicate, and if you push too hard, everything will shatter. Xia Ling swallowed. We've got to pass it on, Lu Tao. You're the one I need to train. You're the successor. Lu Tao's eyes softened. I'm not the one you're looking for. You see, Xia Ling, I've tried to find a successor for years. But the truth is, I can't teach what I don't understand myself. This gift, this curse, it's too much for me. I've seen glimpses of what could happen if the wrong person takes control of it. She felt a chill run through her. What do you mean? Who else is there? Lu Tao didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood up from his desk and walked to the window, looking out at the empty campus below. There's someone else, he said finally. Someone who's been watching us. Watching you. Someone who has the power to twist time in ways you can't even imagine. Xia Ling's stomach dropped. Who? Lu Tao didn't look back at her. The Time Breaker. I've felt their presence for a long time now. They don't just want the power, they want to break time itself. To unravel everything. And they'll stop at nothing to get what they want. Xia Ling turned to Wei Chen, her mind reeling. But if the Time Breaker wants to destroy time, then what are we supposed to do? How can we stop them? Lu Tao turned then, his gaze locked on hers. You have to find the next one. The true successor. They're the only one who can fix the timeline. But be careful. The Time Breaker is already close. They'll be watching your every move. Xia Ling didn't know what to say. The weight of everything was too much to bear. The clock, the power, it was all connected, and yet the pieces didn't fit together. Not yet. But one thing was clear, they didn't have much time. We'll find them, Wei Chen said, his voice steady, cutting through the silence that had fallen over the room. We'll find the successor, and we'll stop this. But we have to move quickly. Lu Tao didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to his desk, his expression distant. The moment felt final, like they were all on the edge of something they couldn't undo. Xia Ling looked at Wei Chen, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. They were about to face something bigger than either of them could imagine, and there was no turning back now. Let's go, Xia Ling said quietly. We need to find the next one. Before the Time Breaker does. As they left the office, the weight of Lu Tao's words hung in the air, a foreboding warning that they couldn't ignore. The world was shifting, and time was no longer their ally. They didn't have long to find the successor, and they had no idea how much time was left before the Time Breaker made their move.